Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of SEBA Reader Meets Writer. I am your host, Wiley Cash. I'm the 2019 Pat Conroy Legacy Award winner from SEBA, and I'm also the writer in residence at UNC Asheville, coming to you live from the coast of North Carolina. I want to tell you a little bit about SEBA. It stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. And what this organization does is it represents almost 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the Southeast. And perhaps you are here tonight to see Justin Reynolds talk about his books, his previous book and his forthcoming book, because one of those bookstores made it possible for you to get an invitation and join us tonight. Please support that bookstore by ordering Justin's current book or pre-ordering his book that'll be out in September, Early Departures, that he'll talk about a little bit tonight, because these literary, independently owned bookstores are the lifebloods of our intellectual and academic communities, and we need to support them. So please consider, as we say, dancing with the one that brought you and ordering from those stores. We are doing these events so many times a week, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, Saturdays. So go and check on your independent bookstore's website, their events page, and see what authors we have coming up. Next week on Thursday evening, we have Heather Bell Adams discussing her novel, The Good Luck Stone, next Thursday at 7 p.m. So whatever bookstore got you here tonight, make sure that bookstore gets you back here Thursday night next week. So I'm really excited to have Justin A. Reynolds with us. I think he's the first YA author that we've had while I've been hosting. And I know YA readership is enormous, as reflected in the success that his first book has. So I'll tell you a little bit about Justin before I turn it over to him. Justin A. Reynolds has always wanted to be a writer. The earliest documentation of this desire was recorded on a sheet of green, learn how to write with a jumbo pencil ruled kindergarten paper, which can be found prominently displayed in his mom's office. It might end up on eBay, who knows. Opposite of Always, his debut novel was an Indies Introduced Top 10 debut, a School Library Journal Best Book of 2019, translated into 17 languages, and it's being developed for film with Paramount Players. He hangs out in Northeast Ohio with his family and likes it, and is probably somewhere right now dancing terribly. Well, we know where he is right now. His second novel, Early Departures, will publish in September of this year. And as he and I were just talking, ball is life. So I'll turn it over to Justin A. Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Wiley. Appreciate the intro. And good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for joining us, first and foremost. We appreciate it. I'm excited to be able to do this event with you all tonight. And to everybody who especially supports the young adult market, we really appreciate that. The young adult community, as many of you probably know, is a pretty close-knit community. We tend to stick together, and it's been nice to be welcomed into that community and to have already created so many lifelong friendships because of it. So happy to be here, and happy, of course, with the success of Opposite of Always, Early Departures. Even writing the book was a bit of a struggle, to be quite honest. I'll say this: oftentimes they talk about the sophomore novel and the sophomore slump, as it were, the difficulty in trying to kind of duplicate whatever magic it was that allowed you to create the first book. And so many times when we're creating that first book, it's in a vacuum, right? Typically no one's expecting anything from us. We're doing it because we desire to, because we can't imagine doing anything else. Our goal, like my goal for me was, because my mom worked at a library most of my life, and my sister and I spent so much of our lives in libraries, I always thought, I just want to see my book on the bookshelf. And so from time and time again, we'd be at the library and I'd go and I'd find literary fiction and I'd find the R's, and I would say, my book is going to be slotted right here. And that for me was going to be the sign of success. If I could ever achieve that goal, then I would be happy. Little did I know I was in the wrong section. I should have been in the young adult section, but we've made that transition. And I'll even talk about that for a quick second. I love literary fiction, and in fact, that's kind of all the schooling that I've done and all of the training that I've done has been with the vein of literary fiction. And I was always slanted toward contemporary literary fiction. And I love it to this day, and it'll always be important to me. I think where I ended up making the personal transition was because I felt like the program that I was in and the programs that I had been around were great in that they helped you to learn how to accept literary criticism, how to read for understanding, how to have critical thinking, the structure of storytelling, all that good stuff that we know we get from school. But for me, it felt like a lot of my contemporaries at the time, maybe it was just my program, but a lot of my friends who were in programs similar to mine expressed the same concern, was that it kind of just felt like people were more worried about maybe like the pyrotechnics of storytelling than actually telling a great story. More worried about being impressive. Let me construct this the 60-page sentence with 4 commas and wow you with my wide array of vocabulary and random vernacular. And so I think while that like certainly has its place, it just kind of it lacked the storytelling that had brought me to books in the first place. And so while I certainly think that the great books will always have a degree of intelligence and humor and heart and soul and will challenge you for sure as a reader, I think that what drew me to young adult literature was just that the heart of it is so very big. And I think that for a time, there was obviously some very big books that have happened in the last 15, 20 years. But for I think a period of time, like when I was growing up, there wasn't really a young adult category per se. It was a few books on a shelf, and it wasn't a very wide market. And of course, like now we realize how wide that market is, and I'm happy to be a part of it. When people ask me what I think truly the difference at this point in time is between young adult literature and adult literature, it's really just the age of the protagonist and the antagonist oftentimes. Um, and the other part of it is that most of the things that you're writing about, young people are experiencing for the first or second time only in their entire lives. So to me, that's the primary difference, is that we're talking about first experiences, second experiences. We're talking about new love, first heartbreak. We're talking about a lot of domestic things that happen in the home when you feel kind of powerless as the young person, perhaps in the family. So to me, that's the only real difference between young adult literature and what adult literature stands for right now. So I'm happy to be a part of it. So Early Departures comes out September 22nd. And this book is I mentioned how challenging it was to write. And part of it was certainly being in my own head. When you write something that people seem to like, as people have seemed to like Opposite of Always, of course, there's a pressure, whether it's external. Most of mine was definitely internal. I tend to be a perfectionist. And so most of the pressure that I felt was generated from within, to create a story that would capture attention, capture the imagination of readers, but also like kind of continue some of what I was trying to say with Opposite of Always. There's some themes in there that I had started to talk about that I really wanted to delve in a little bit deeper. The other reason why this story was a little bit more challenging to write was because Opposite of Always, I wrote that in about a 4-month period. It kind of came out in a fever dream. It was fully developed. I heard Jack's voice from the very beginning. He said, I like to think, people like to say there's someone for everyone. That was the very first line I heard in my head Jack saying. And then from there on, I knew who Jack was. And with Jamal in Early Departures, I knew his voice. It was just a different type of voice. And so I had to try to figure out the ins and outs and kind of allow Jamal the same space and latitude that I had given Jack to take me wherever the story took me. And the other component of it is that I'm incapable of writing stories that aren't deeply personal. My first book, I've talked about it many times, was in response to several deaths of very close people in my life. My aunt, who I was very close to, she was like a mother, a very good friend, one of my best friends passed, and then also a patient. In my former life, prior to full-time writing, I was a registered nurse. I worked in hematology and oncology for a number of years. And the majority of the patients that I saw and that I had the privilege of working with in hematology were sickle cell patients. And so there was a particular patient there. Obviously, I'm not going to reveal her information, but unfortunately, she passed away after a very strong battle. She had a number of other issues. She was only 24, and that deeply impacted me. We had developed quite a close relationship because the difference from a sickle cell patient to some other types of difficult diseases is that quite often, and of course it varies from patient to patient, but quite often a patient will have a hospital stay of several weeks, several months. It varies. And so during that period of time, working 12, 13, 14-hour days, it's impossible not to form close bonds to many of the patients that you see day in and day out. You see them in many cases more than they see their family, sometimes more than you see yours in a given week. And so that really struck me. And when I gave myself permission to write what I was feeling, opposite of always, is what came from that. But I still had some feelings about my best friend and about that loss and how that felt to lose a friend. And I think part of it was that in the other cases, I felt like they definitely knew where they stood with me, and I knew where I stood with them, and everything was fine. I think in the case of my friend, like while we definitely we didn't have the type of falling out that Jamal and Q have in this book at the outset of the book, but I think what I always kind of thought about after he passed was that I wish I had just been more direct in my feelings about him. I wish I had just been more vocal about my feelings. And I think that, you know, I play a lot of sports. I'm into sports. I come from a very competitive family. Everyone who knows like my family will also attest that it's a very it's almost like there's like definitely some, I think not even just my family, I think the community is like, you know, we live in this kind of hyper masculine community still, right? And so I think kind of growing up in that and trying to navigate those waters, I think there were certain things I was afraid to do, or to step, or to kind of go against the grain, as it were. And I wish now, you know, knowing a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more wise than I was then, that I had just been more vocal in my appreciation for my friend. And the thing about his death is that it was very sudden. You know, he was hanging out on a Friday and wasn't feeling well, and by Sunday was gone. Don't go with us, and unexpected. So what that really just kind of helped me appreciate is that we have to seize the moments when we have them. We can't count on having tomorrow. We can't say I'll put that off, the important things off until tomorrow. We can't. There are some things that we need to truly seize the moment with. And so Early Departures is about a kid named Jamal who starts to realize that the most important things in life have been, he's kind of let them slip by. At the outset of the story, the main character, Jamal, has been grieving for quite some time. And his best friend, who opposite him, is a kid named Quincy, who goes by Q. And they've been best friends since they were kids, the kind of kids who, like, you know, are running up and down the steps all day when they're little, and, you know, throwing stuff, and the parents are telling them, go take that downstairs, take that upstairs. They're outside, grass stains, you don't see them all day. They're imagining what their life is going to be, you know, the best type of best friends. And as they get older, that friendship only deepens. And the great thing about their relationship is that in turn, their parents are also close. So now we have a a very tight bond, right? It's an extended family in the realest sense. But unfortunately, um, tragedy strikes, and 22 months from the start of the novel, prior to the start of the novel, Jamal, the main character, lost both of his parents in a tragic accident. And to top that off, not only is he dealing with the loss of both of his parents, he holds his best friend Quincy responsible for that. And he has not communicated those feelings directly to Quincy, not directly to anyone. And so he's been carrying a lot of grief and also harboring a lot of resentment for 22 months. And they haven't really spoken except for, you know, occasional head nod, the type of passing each other in the hallway, that kind of thing, but no real communication. And a lot of it is, you know, Quincy doesn't quite understand what's happened, what's transpired to lead them in this situation. But he also has his share of disappointments and frustration with Jamal. So it definitely goes both ways at this point in time. And they find themselves at the very start of the book, at a party where now it's inevitable they're going to finally truly cross paths in a uncontrolled environment, and words ensue. It's a pretty intense discussion that turns into essentially a fight. And at the end of it, they go their separate ways once again, except shortly thereafter, before Jamal can leave the party, the party's on the beach. He hears someone screaming in the water of the lake, and he runs out to the lake and he finds that it's Quincy. And by the time he's able to finally get Quincy out of the deep water, it's almost too late. And by the time they get Quincy to the hospital, Quincy is almost gone. And in the waiting room, they find out that he's indeed passed away. Fortunately, they live in a time in which there's a technology, healthcare technology called reanimation, that allows you to bring someone back to life. There's a few catches, as you might imagine, because it's brand new. The technology at this point in time only allows you to bring someone back for a short period of time. To date, the longest they had brought anyone back was 19 days, right? So not a lot of time. And to top it off, it also requires extensive testing and diagnostics on the deceased party to make sure that they indeed qualify to be reanimated and brought back to life. Well, as you can imagine, this technology also is quite expensive, in addition to being volatile. And fortunately, though, some mysterious donor steps in and decides that they want to use this technology to bring back Quincy for unknown reasons. And as we might expect, Quincy's mother, she's a single mother, she has mixed feelings about it, because part of her is ecstatic at the opportunity to see her son again, but the other part of her is very skeptical. One, will this technology even work? And two, what about the ethics of bringing someone back, right? Because here's the other part about the technology. In order for it to be successful and for the person to acclimate back into the world, they have to reset your brain slightly. And when they do that, then you no longer have a memory of dying, which in turn then means that when you're brought back, you don't know that you've died. And unless you're told, right, you don't know that you're going to die again. And because Quincy is underage, 17, his mother assumes rights over his healthcare decisions. And she decides that it's in Quincy's best interest not to know either thing, not to know that he's died, not to know that he's going to die again in just a few short weeks. And of course, she has good intentions, right? She doesn't want Quincy to walk around with the weight of mortality on his shoulders, like any mother or parent or father would worry about. But then on the other hand, Jamal, who now has seen his best friend die and realizes the gravity of these types of relationships, what it means to let one fall by the wayside that means so much to you, he can't stand the thought of being dishonest another second. Right? So it's about two kids kind of coming back together. And the question that I started with was, can we ever truly find our way back? Can we ever truly find our way back to the thing that we had, right? So many times we reminisce about a relationship that we had, whether it be romantic or platonic, maybe familial, and we think like, And that was one of the best relationships. If only I had done this thing differently, or if I had another opportunity. But like, can we ever truly get the magic back? That's the question that I asked, and I didn't really have an answer, which was, this is the best type of questions, right? And so Jamal kind of goes on that journey, and it sounds really heavy. And of course, obviously, anytime you're talking about death, it's heavy. It's also funny. It's also funny. They do the great thing about this combination, about this duel, is that so much of the time that they spent, they were recording as teenagers, especially, and they made these videos that they used to kind of upload to what is essentially YouTube. And there would be like these videos, kind of like you see on late night TV, where they're like interviewing people on the streets, and they're like, hey, you know, asking people questions, and people are saying like really dumb answers, right? And like embarrassing themselves on national TV. Well, they do those kind of things. They do a lot of skits, and so they're interspliced throughout the story are some of these skits that really shows the bond and the connection that Quincy and Jamal have formed prior to all of the drama that has entered into their lives. And the best part about it is that Jamal eventually realizes that what he really needs to do is to give Quincy the best few weeks of his life, right? Just as you and I would want to give our best friend. So that's what Early Departures is about. I thought I'd read just a little quick part of it. I normally never read from the middle of a book, because I don't know, I just always feel weird about it, because it's like I feel like you have to explain so much to get to that point. But I am going to do that for the first time today. And the reason why is because we kind of set it up already. So this is the technology. The way it works is that when they reawaken you, they put you back in familiar environment. So you're not waking up in a hospital bed. You're waking up in your own bed. Usually surrounded. They usually want you to be surrounded by at least one or two people who are very close to you or have some type of close connection, in order to help facilitate the reawakening, to make it as smooth as possible. So Jamal, because Quincy's mother is having a hard time with imagining her son coming back, Jamal is kind of drafted into this responsibility. And so now he's waiting in Quincy's room as Quincy is spread out on the bed, still not awoken. And so this is going to be that moment when Quincy wakes up. Nothing prepares you for the moment your dead friend opens his eyes. I must have missed that day in health class. And while my parents fumbled admirably through the birds and the bees talk, they totally bombed the what to do when your friend comes back to life chat. So yeah, color me ill prepared. And yet, here I am, sitting in a desk chair, staring at my dead friend lying still in his headboardless bed, his thick arms casket folded atop his chest. There's a wake after someone dies, and this is a wait before Q undies. I hear Miss B downstairs, that's Quincy's mother, moving around the kitchen. I exhausted every argument I had to convince her to come in the room with me, but in the end, I promised her I'd be okay alone, that Q was going to be okay, that when Q woke, I'd find her. I can't ask you to do this, she said, lips quivering like a divining rod. You didn't have to, I said. I was halfway up the stairs when she called my name. What happened between you and Quincy? What do you mean, I asked, but I know what she means. Why did you stop being friends? He wouldn't even talk about it. I swallowed hard. Respectfully, Miss B, if Q didn't tell you, I feel like I shouldn't either. I'm sorry. She stared a beat, then tipped her head like a guard, waving me through a checkpoint. I remember what the lady said in the center's video. The center is where they did the reanimation. Rest assured, we'll monitor the entire reawakening from a safe distance. What if I'm being watched right now? The video hadn't explained how they monitored. I assumed they have some kind of chip embedded in Q's brain or something, but what if they meant literal monitoring, like cameras, mics? I glanced around looking for spyware or anything I don't recognize. I used to know Q's room like my own. I could pictograph it from memory, every detail, from the Mighty Moat live in concert posters on the wall to what he keeps in all 5 dresser drawers. And even after all this time, not much has changed. Nothing obviously out of place or weirdly in place or monetary. But also, if the sender could resurrect the dead, I don't think they'd have a hard time bugging Q's room undetectably. My eyes fall onto Q's laptop. What if they were watching me, listening to me through the laptop camera? Q's left eye twitches, or maybe I imagine it. Maybe it's my eyes flickering. It's hard to know what's real anymore. Q's eyes flutter but don't open, like flicking a lighter that won't stay lit. He sits up, turns his head toward me, eyes still closed, his mouth up, opening and shutting, but soundless, like watching Frankenstein wake with the volume muted. And then Q suddenly falls backward, head thudding against his pillow, arms falling to either side, all 10 fingers twitching. He does this several times, rising, falling like he's installing a new update, rebooting after each cycle. I remember another video line. Likely there will be false starts, several, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't be alarmed when your dead best friend tries to come back to life, sputtering like an old mower. Sit with that. So that's a little bit of the reawakening, and I'll leave it to your imagination if Q actually gets to wake up. It's halfway through the books. I think you probably know. But I think, yeah, go ahead, Wayne. I think that's.
You want to take some questions? We've had a ton of people commenting, and I actually have the first question, and I forgot to mention at the top of the show, so please forgive me to our viewers. If you have a question for Justin, go to the chat box, share your name, share your home bookstore, and ask Justin your question. But before I get to the questions and the comments that people have left, I loved what you said at the top of the show about YA is about the first of everything. First love, first heartbreak, first betrayal. And as a writer, and I know you said that you were, kind of raised up and trained up in literary fiction, but what you're doing is literary fiction, but it's just for a different segment of the population. But what is the process of getting in there as a writer with those first loves, first heartbreaks, and just getting in? Are you like pulling back on your stuff? Are you pulling back on stuff you've read? Are you looking at your kids? Like, what are you doing to really get in there and ferret that stuff out?
Yeah, I always say that I don't ever have to like get into my feelings because I never really leave my feelings. I am a person who definitely I don't have a I don't have a difficult time getting into my emotions, fortunately. And so a lot of those feelings, like I said, those are first. A lot of those feelings that Jamal and Jack and the whole gang in both books are feeling are feelings that I still struggle with. And like the types of questions that I try to talk about or attempt to at least investigate, if not answer, are my own questions about, what's the purpose of us being, like, why be here? What's the most important thing that we could be doing with our time? And time again, whether it's a 16-year-old or a 56-year-old or 86-year-old, the answers to those questions tend to be the same. It's that the interpersonal relationships that we have, right? The connections that we form with people, those are the things that are going to be, that make life worth living, right? And so I think that is what allows me to do it. Plus, like I still have like a lot of young people that I'm around, and so I steal vernacular and phrases from them, and I go on TikTok, right? Go on TikTok when I have a few moments, watch some TikTok videos. I have a TikTok account, but I'm not going to tell anybody what it is yet until I'm ready for it.
So you're ready to premiere it with something awesome?
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Right. Yeah. I got some videos. I got some videos that that I'm getting ready to premiere pretty soon.
We've got a couple of questions about like the emotional tone of the book and the emotional tone of your previous book. Robin, several other people, Tori, Annalise, they say, your first book had some really depth of emotion, but had some really funny parts. Is this book similar? And how do you, as a writer, swing the pendulum back and forth between the highs and lows of emotion?
I think that the book, to me, the books are I mean, they're standalone novels completely, but in my own head, I see them as a duology. I think that they that early departures kind of picks up on Jack's story from Opposite of Always, in the sense of this. And I don't want to spoil Opposite of Always, but in that book, it's a story about time loops and about the different ways that life could have gone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way that Jamal is living his life, the scenarios that he finds himself in which he's been estranged from his best friend and is now trying to navigate this on top of this weird premise of his friend being allowed to come back to life for a brief period of time. It's not all that different than the speculative elements that are found in Opposite of Always. And then to top it off, I recognize I'm a person who loves a good emotional story. Like, I like the story that makes you feel like you're almost kind of breaking down. The story you have to kind of put. I'm the person who's like watching the movie or reading the book, and I have to like close the book for a second or like pause the movie and like look away because it's just too much sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so I'm drawn to that naturally, but what I recognize that I'm drawn to equally is the levity, the moment that lets you take that breath. Mm-hmm. And so Early Departures, just like Opposite of Always, has those moments sliced in between, because that's how real life works, right? You're at a funeral and someone tells a joke and you're laughing, right? Is that appropriate? I mean, of course, like, that's what life is. Life is always both sides working, sometimes against each other, sometimes with each other. But I think it's important to show the humor even in the most dramatic of sequences.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, I don't know if you teach. I know you've been in the classroom, but I don't know if you teach or talk to a lot of young writers. And this is my own personal comment, not a question, but I feel like young writers and beginning writers think, if I can just make this scene as sad as possible, then the reader will feel sad. But I say, no, you're not swinging us through emotions. We don't know what the register is. Are you thinking about that when you're getting down something sad? You're like, I got to bring it up to show them how far I've brought them.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I remember years and years ago feeling like, oh, like in this scene, I want people to feel this thing, and now I don't think about that at all, to be honest. What I'm thinking about is, whenever I'm writing, I think like the best advice that I always give is that whenever I'm writing, I'm attempting to go to a place that I don't expect. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to a place that feels familiar, whether it's up or down, it doesn't interest me. And I know that it won't interest the reader for very long. I'm trying to challenge myself. I try to paint myself into as many corners as possible. And then when I think about the solutions on how to get that character out of that scenario, I throw away the first 3 or 4 that come to me because they're cliched, right? I've just read a book that did the same thing. I have a friend who's working on a similar story who did that. It's too obvious. Mm-hmm. It doesn't give us the release that we deserve after kind of hanging in there for a period of time. And so a lot of times I sit on those pivotal turns for days, if not weeks sometimes. So I'll be pushing the lawnmower and then it'll come to me and I just let the lawnmower, keep going, and I run back into the house and I try to jot it down as soon as possible. So I think that, like, yeah, you what I do know is this, the kind of the beats of storytelling is that if you want people to feel what it feels like to be on top, we also have to understand what it feels like for that character to be to be at the lowest point. And I know that in order for us to feel like we've gone through a journey, right, we need to have felt the person. We need to know who they are in the beginning. We need to feel like they're on the verge of getting that thing, only to lose that thing and more, right? And then we need to take them to the point where the character gets not what they thought they wanted from the beginning, but what they've always needed. Mm-hmm. Right? And then from that point on, and we give them what they always needed, and we give them a little bit of what they wanted, but not the way that they thought they would get it, if that makes sense.
That's a great formula. I wish I'd written that down. I would tell my students that on Monday night.
Yeah, that's always the way that that's the way I mean, like, essentially in those 2 sentences, that's the way that I tell stories.
That's really well constructed. We have a question from Hannah. The question is, I've never seen a contemporary YA novel have an element of time travel before. So how did you get the idea to write the novel with time travel and do it so well?
Thank you for the question, Hannah. So I always love speculative elements. My dad wasn't a huge reader, but he loved science fiction, especially movies and television. He was a huge Star Trek person, and like, I think that anybody who knows him would be surprised that he loves Star Trek the way he does. But he was a faithful watcher, and so like I my sister and I would watch it with him, and we just kind of developed an appreciation for this idea of like kind of weird elements or weird things, science fiction things happening in what apparently is kind of a contemporary world. We're just in space and we're doing all these other things, right? And so I've always been curious as to like what happens when we live in the same world that you and I exist in every day, but then we just change one rule or one fundamental principle about it. And so in the first book, it was, what if this character who has seemingly gotten the opportunity to finally get the thing he wanted, which was a deep, meaningful relationship with Kate, and then he loses it. And then of course, and then he comes back to the moment where he first met her. What would that look like? And then if I kept resetting him and sending him back to that moment, what changes would he make in each attempt to try to find his way through it? And initially, of course, Jack, being a man, thinks that he's supposed to save the woman, but of course, the woman doesn't need to be saved, right? That's not what the story's about at all. It's about him recognizing that the most important things don't require you to sacrifice another important thing. You don't have to sacrifice a friend for a family member. That there's ways that you can find to give each person as much of you as possible. And is there a little bit of compromise? Of course, but there's a way that you can be there for all the people who are there for you as well. And it's about the effort and the attempt and those people feeling that you care enough to try. And so that's what that story is about. That's where the time travel comes. And also, I'm a big fan of Groundhog Day. So there's that. And like Primer, there's like a lot of movies that I love that I was like, oh, and I mean, Back to the Future, right? Like all those movies kind of deal with an element of time travel.
We have a woman, somebody's asking a question. Tiffany says, shout out to Abigail on Facebook for recommending Opposite of Always. I literally finished reading it 2 minutes before this video and I'm still digesting it. And she has some questions here, but I appreciate her getting in. But before we go, somebody does have a question that got in here. Let's see. It was such an interesting. Ashton, Ernest and Hadley booksellers in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Ashton asked, what made you transition from being an RN to a full-time writer?
Oh, good question. First of all, thanks to Abigail and to Tiffany from the previous comment. Appreciate that, and thanks for the support. As far as becoming going from nursing to full-time writer, I think like most people who knew me, like the road, even I won't go into, but the road into becoming a registered nurse happened later in my life, and a lot of people were surprised that I went that route. And the reason, a big part of it, was that I had a family member who was in a hospice and was dying, and I was so impressed by the healthcare workers taking care of her, and how they were able to give her dignity in very undignified moments, that I thought, man, my life doing marketing and working in sales and all that stuff, it doesn't have the same meaning. I need to do something that matters to people, that impacts people in a positive way. And so I went back to school, and was one of the oldest people in my program at the time. But it mattered to me, and I'm glad that I did it. And a lot of people were like, I can't believe you've worked in these kind of white collar jobs. I can't imagine you doing this thing. And I'm like, if you look at my resume, half the things that are on there, no one could probably imagine me doing. But I'm all about experience, and I think I want to be wherever people are. And if I can in turn also use that time to help someone a little bit, the way that I've been helped throughout some of the situations that my loved ones have dealt with, then that's a life of great fulfillment to me. The reason why I transitioned from that, to be quite honest, it's a long story, but essentially is that after years of seeing patient after patient that you care about pass, I was feeling a little burnt out, to be quite honest. It's difficult. I'm not a person, there's two different types of nurses. There's a type that I think people sometimes give a bad rap to because they think like, this person doesn't really care. They don't seem to be connected to their patients. And I think that to a certain extent, you almost have to develop a little bit of that to protect your heart. because it's hard to see people suffering. People, most of the time, people come to the hospital, they're not coming with happy feelings. I mean, save maybe giving birth to a child or maybe some surgery that's going to allow them to get rid of some pain. But most of the time, no one wants to be there. Right? Mm-hmm. And so it's tough to see that. And I'm the type of person, I'm not the person who can go and not feel the thing. I feel the thing very deeply. I feel everything very deeply. And so I'm the person who has to call after my shift is over to make sure that a person in room 6 is okay. Right. That just takes its toll. After a while, it's like I felt so drained and I was constantly anxious that I had not done enough. I'm like, what if I could have done this or done that? What if I would have saw this? And it just weighed on me to the point that it was difficult to continue. Do I miss it? 100%. I think it's some of the most important work that's being done, and especially right now, right? When you think about the sacrifices that those amazing people are making, it's phenomenal beyond words, and it is sacrifice. But I think that right now, for where I am and now, being able to tell those stories and use the stories that they've given me permission to use as well, is where I'm supposed to be for now.
Well, man, I'm glad you've been with us for these past little bit of time. So if you've heard something you enjoyed tonight, please consider ordering Justin's book that's available right now, or Early Departures. It'll be out in September. Pre-order that book. Pre-orders make such a huge difference in the publishing industry. So please pre-order this book from your favorite independent bookstore. And I want to thank Justin. I want to thank everybody for the great questions and the great comments. It looks like a lot of people, you have a lot of advanced readers for Early Departures. A lot of people have already eaten it up. So please, everyone, join us next week, a week from tonight at 7 p.m. We'll be discussing Heather Bell Adams' new novel, The Good Luck Stone. Until then, be safe, wear a mask, and we will see you next time.
Wiley, can I quickly interject just to say that
Sure.
I'm very appreciative of independent bookstores. Cleveland is like very fortunate. We have several that are extremely important to the community. And so I just want to say thank you for all the work that you do in the communities. I have a personal connection to independent bookstores. And so I'm very thankful that I know right now, in some cases, there's some struggling happening with where we find ourselves. And my heart certainly goes out to those people. So if we can in any way support our local businesses, but especially our independent bookstores and booksellers, I hope that we all find a way to do that, even if it's just word of mouth.
Yep. Well said. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, man.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.